friends, welcome back to the Sweat Elite podcast. It's Matt here, the founder at Sweat Elite, and welcome back to another episode of In My Opinion on all podcast players and also on YouTube, the second one we're doing on YouTube. This will not be on the Sweat Elite YouTube channel anymore. I'm going to open up a new channel so that I can put all the podcasts on that channel. I've learned a bit about YouTube algorithms via my colleague Alan recently, and I think that it's going to be best to put this on a new channel because people are expecting workout videos on the main channel, and yeah, I think it's best to split them up. So if you do want to watch this on video, which is not exciting at all, it's me just speaking into a camera with a black background and a microphone in my face, you can do so by just searching Matt Fox IMO 17, and you'll find the channel. Subscribe if you like, feel free, but yeah, it will be on a different channel moving forward. And thanks to people last week that were pointing out that I wasn't looking at the camera most of the time. I was looking at the middle of the screen because I'm doing it in selfie mode on my iPhone 16 Pro. And I was just looking at the middle of the screen, which obviously isn't the camera. So I wasn't really looking at the camera. So I'm going to be trying to look at the camera this time. But if you're listening on the podcast players, ignore all that. But plenty to talk about this week. We have the year in sport on Strava. I'll go through some of the stats that at least I've been given via the Strava team. Alex Yee is running the London Marathon, which I'm stoked to see. I love seeing triathletes race on the roads. Part of the reason why I'm a fan of Morgan Pearson, I mean, he's a legend anyways, but I love the way that he gets out there and races half marathons on the roads. And I've said for years that I would love to see more challenges from Ironman triathletes, especially on the roads. I think one of the coolest things to see as a spectator of both sports would be to see a showdown of all the top Ironman triathletes in a marathon. I think it would be so good to see Christian Blumenfeld, Gustav Iden, Patrick Langer, Magnus Ditlev, Joe Skipper, Sam Laidlow, all of these guys. I'm probably missing a few big names just off the top of my head there, but I would love to see them race over a marathon at some point, but obviously it's hard to fit into the season. But Alex Yee is racing the London Marathon next year, and I can't wait to watch that because I just think that's going to be super interesting. I put up a poll on the Sweat Elite Instagram a few days ago about what people would predict that he would run, and most people thought that he would run over 2:10, which I thought was a bit strange. And it led me to believe maybe people on our Instagram on the Sweat Elite Instagram that is, don't realize that he is so fast over 10K. Because Alex has broken 28 minutes, he's run 27.50 something, I think, for the 10K, I believe at least once, maybe more. Could be wrong, it's at least once. And I think many people on that Instagram probably don't realize that. Because if you can run 27 something for 10K, you really should be able to run 61 low to 61 high, maybe even break 61 for the half. And if you can do that, then you should be able to run 2.7 to 2.9 in the marathon. Now, that wouldn't happen that wouldn't happen on the first attempt for most people. Some people just take a little while to figure it out. But Alex has the fueling, experience with training for triathlon and doing a lot of cycling. He would no doubt be very clued in with the fueling, which is the thing that probably cripples most people in their first few marathons. And yeah, he's got the speed for it. So I'm really looking forward to that. Alex and I actually had a few back and forth messages after the poll. I think he was, I don't know, he didn't really seem too fazed about the fact that people were predicting he'd run slower than he thought. But I just let him know that I thought he'd run 2:07.49. So that's my prediction. It's very bold, that one, for sure, for London Marathon. And he actually wrote back and said, that sounds about right, but probably not in the first one. I think he was indicating that that's probably what his target would be for the second or third. But it sounds to me like his target is about 2:08 to 2:09. Which seems pretty reasonable. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes down at London. And what else? I've got plenty of questions here to answer. Workouts of the week, all that fun stuff. A couple of tricky questions I'll answer, but I'm always up for answering difficult questions. The Marathon Project was announced this morning as well, which is really exciting. I hope to be able to run that. Hopefully they'll accept foreigners. Marathon Project started in 2020. It's only been one-off event at this point, I believe, and it's sort of an elite/sub-elite only marathon that takes place, or at least it did take place in 2020 in Arizona, and it's like a dead flat loop that's set up with bottles and everything. Sarah Hall ran her personal best there, 2:20 in 2020, and that looks really interesting. I think it's on the last week, or maybe the second last week of December next year, so you can find out all about that. I got the news on the FlowTrack Instagram. I used to get my news on Citius Mag and people keep forwarding me Citius Mag stuff, but I can't view it. It says messages unavailable because they blocked me a little while ago, and I have absolutely no idea why. I've never spoken to them before. Seems a really American thing, this. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe that's a racist thing to say. Racist? I love America, and I've got many really good American friends. So that's probably not the right word to use. But the amount of American people since I moved here temporarily in 2021 that have blocked me on the basis of almost nothing is pretty wild. There's probably a good 10 or more. And it's almost like, I don't know if it's an American thing or if it's just social media. Is it just like, is it a thing that happens normally now because people are so sensitive on social media? I don't know. But I've never spoken to them. Chris Chavez, if you're listening, which I know for sure you're not, come on the podcast. I'd love to interview you. I'd love to check out, how you started Citius Mag, especially because I will say, and I've never said this before publicly anywhere. I don't think I've ever even said this maybe to anyone in person, but I did hear about 2.5, 3 years ago, because being a, entrepreneur, quote unquote, I don't really like to use that word for myself, but, I do have been involved in many startups, and I've probably been involved in 11 or 12 now, of which majority of them have failed. I'm always curious to know how people launch things and get things monetized, especially in the media space. And I would love to learn how Citius Mag got off the ground, because I feel like I've explained, and one of the questions here actually is a little bit about the start of Sweat Elite. Even though I have explained that a few times before, I can rehash things. I heard that Citius Mag was just basically started because Chris Chavez not the reason why it was started, but it was started as a result of Chris Chavez just coming from an extremely wealthy background. And when I hear that about any startup, that someone sort of starts a business from just having unlimited cash behind their back from parents, I genuinely don't have a lot of respect for that. But that's not to say I don't respect Citius Mag. They do great things for the sport, and a lot of their content is fantastic. But when I learned that a few years ago, because I was trying to work out, when I moved to Boulder in 2021, sort of temporarily, to try and figure out how I could stay there long term, I had a visa at the time that would allow me to stay up to 6 months of the year, not anymore, which is why I was in and out of the US quite a lot through those years. I was, I knew how FlowTrack monetized, because they've had a subscription base from many years ago, maybe even over a decade ago, where they have, what seems to be probably thousands of people paying subscription fees, which can fund their content. Sweat Elite has we have a subscription as well, but it's just for the articles. But we've funded our way through, YouTube ads, which pays incredibly poorly. Most YouTube videos we make $100 to $400, which doesn't even cover the flights, let alone the bike rental, the car hire, the camera equipment, actually paying the person to do the job and editing and all that. But we also have been able to survive via brand deals and obviously the Coaching Academy now, which is our main source of income. But Citius Mag is one that I just was confused about for years, because they were growing at a similar rate to us. They were doing slightly different things to us. We do compete to some extent. We both have running podcasts. In the US, they're obviously huge, but outside the US, probably not so big, because they tend to focus on US athletes a lot more than normal. But I'm just genuinely curious to know if that's true, what I just said, because it may not be. I don't know for sure. So Chris Chavez, I invite you to come on the podcast. I would love to learn how it started, and also why I am blocked on all the channels, because I used to get my running news from Citius Mag, and randomly I was blocked one day for no reason. And I would hate to be as a result of reading something that's just not true, because I feel like most of the people that have tried to distance themselves like that is as a result of this. And that was absolutely the case with the running club that I was involved in here in Chicago, which there's actually a question a bit about that a bit later on here. Looking forward to the marathon project. I hope to race that next year. That sounds like a really fast race. All right, getting on to the questions. All right, Susie, Strava DM. Hey Matt, thanks so much for putting out these in my opinions. They're very refreshing to hear someone just speak their mind without any agenda or promoting of brands, or just simply bad ideas. My question to you is, sorry if you've answered this before, how did you originally get into running, and what inspired you to try and originally make the Olympics in the 800? You sometimes speak to the point of lifetime mileage. It would be good to hear a little bit more specifically about yours. Yeah, okay. So I have shared this before, but I don't expect people to be able to keep up with all the content. So when I was younger, where did my sort of sporting years start? So when I was very young, the ages of, 5 to 10, I was predominantly doing, Australians would know what this is, surf lifesaving. It's pretty much like swimming, but it's in the surf, and it's competing on surfboards. That sounds weird, but Australians know exactly what I'm talking about, but anyone outside of Australia probably don't. If you don't, and you're actually genuinely interested, just type in surf lifesaving Australia into YouTube and you'll find what I mean. Pretty much mostly swimming, running on the beach, mostly sprints, and I was playing Australian football. So I was focused on predominantly those two things through until pretty much the age of about 17. I stopped doing surf lifesaving at about 15, I believe, but I was also competing pretty seriously in swimming from the ages of really 11 to 17. So Australian football and swimming. Now in the Australian football, I was doing a lot of running because I was playing midfield. I was a rover. Australians would know what that is. I qualified for the Queensland team in under 14? No, I can't remember under 14, under 16 and then under 18. And, you know, my hopes at that point in time were to get picked up by a club, but I was always a bit of an outside chance. I wasn't exactly dominating at the state level at all. I was sort of usually reserve or just getting, you know, on these teams. And yeah, it's obviously was helpful in my running career later on because in that position of rover, you do a lot of running. I was probably doing 30 to 40 kilometers a week of running just in football training and in games. Maybe that's a little exaggerated, as in a little over predicted, but so what would that be, 20, 25 miles? And I was also running in high school, but I was not really training. I was just sort of doing sprints to make up the school teams. I didn't really like running that much in high school, really at all. I was doing mostly the 100 and 200 and 400. I would occasionally do the distance, but in, you know, years 8, 9, 10, 11, I was pretty bad at distance running, really. I just hated it. I was really focused on swimming and football. And after the last year of high school, when I was 17, I stopped swimming. I just had enough of it. I really liked racing swimming, but I didn't really like the training that much. I mean, I don't know if anyone really likes the training of swimming, looking up and down a black line for hours on end. But I really liked the racing. But after and I also wasn't really headed down the path of making the Olympics or anything like that in swimming. I was sort of just a good high school swimmer that was handy for the school. I wasn't even making the state team or anything like that. I think I was, for reference, if you are a swimmer, I think I swam 24, I just broke 25 seconds for 50 freestyle and 100 and for 50 backstroke, which I was also so focused on. I believe I was just under 31, if my memory serves me correctly. This is almost 20 years ago now. So still sprinting. And then, so I stopped swimming when I was 17, but still I think all of that aerobic training in the pool, which would have been 8 to 10 hours a week probably, was obviously very helpful with just endurance in general. And then when I stopped swimming at the very start of year 12, because our swimming season ended, I think, in March or April, I don't think I've ever gone back in the pool and seriously trained since then. And I kept playing football, but then right around the same time in the year of my final year of high school, when I was 17, would have been weeks after I stopped swimming. And this is the year where you have to try and perform your best as an Australian football player to try and get drafted, of which, like I said before, I was always a very, very thin chance. I broke my wrist in a game very badly. I still have, if you can see on the video here, I have maybe you can't see it, but I've got a big scar right on my wrist where I had to put a couple of plates because I basically broke my wrist in a game and kept playing and just kept breaking it more and more. And that put me out for the whole year, which basically completely dimmed my chance of making the AFL. At least that year, I had no chance. And so my original thought was this would have been April 2004, because 2004 was my final year of high school. And I was at the Southport School on the Gold Coast, TSS. Australians listening might be familiar. And I basically made it my mission at that point in time to get as fit as I possibly could in running to try and make the AFL the following year, knowing that that was a very thin chance, because if you don't get drafted in the year that you're 17, it's much harder after that. But I just thought, well, what else am I going to do? And I knew that the Australian football clubs were very focused in on the running time trials. The 3K, I think there was a 1K, and there was a 100-meter sprint. And I was pretty fast over the 100, and I wasn't very good over the 3K, so I made it my mission to try and get really good over 3K between April and the end of the year. And I started training. I was running with a sling on my arm for a while, and then the wrist became somewhat good, but it was still severely fractured, so I was ruled out for the whole year playing football. And I found myself in pretty good 800-meter and 1,500-meter shape about 4 or 5 months after starting running. And then I started competing at some of the school carnivals, and I started winning. And fast forward, at the end of the year in December, I came 5th in Australia in the 800 meters in under 18. And so then I knew that my chances were very slim to make the AFL. Through that time, I had met a runner by the name of Anton Booth, who coached me for the first few years. I doubt anyone listening would know him. He was a very good 400 runner. He's now a doctor, absolute legend. He coached me for the next 3 years because he basically instilled in my mind that I had a chance of making the World Junior Championships in 2006, which were in Beijing. And he basically said that I think that you can run under 150 to make that team. I think in year 12, I ran 153 at GPS and 154 at the Nationals. And that sort of placed me, second at GPS and fifth in Australia. And I made it my mission then to drop AFL. I knew that I was basically no chance. And so I tried to qualify for the 2006 World Championships, World Junior Championships, and then ultimately the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And I missed both I missed the World Junior Championships by one place. I came third at the trials in 2006 and ran 149 something, maybe low. And then in the Beijing Olympics, I had a pretty bad year that year. I don't think I made the final at the 800. I came fifth the following year and then fifth again the following year outside the Olympic trials. But I got down to 148.3, which is probably about 144 now with super shoes. Just kidding. It's probably about 147.5 with super shoes, maybe. I don't know what the conversion is. I haven't worn the super spikes, sorry. But 148.3 was my best 800. And then I basically stuck at the 800 between 2004 and 2013. Raced in the US, raced in Europe a bit. I was running 148, 149 often. I never ran faster than that. I really believed that I could run 146 for a few years there, but I just never got it out. And maybe I was wrong, possibly. I mean, clearly I was wrong. I didn't run it. But yeah, so that's sort of where I got to. I came, fifth in Australia twice, I think. And then maybe one time I came seventh or eighth. This is a while ago now. But then the career sort of ended in 2013. I had a recurring hamstring injury. Could have even been early 2014. I was in Finland at the time. I moved to Finland in 2012 with a relationship at the time. A relationship of which I was in Australia for several years prior. And then I stayed in Finland for 4.5 years. That's the place that I'm currently apparently wanted by the police from people on Let's Run, which is obviously not true because I was there last summer and I'm going back again this summer to race maybe the Helsinki Marathon. But I stayed in Finland between 2012 and 2017 and basically stopped running the 800 in 2014. I would I would probably calculate that between 2004 and 2014, I probably did an average of 70 to 80 kilometers a week, about 50 miles a week on average. There were times where it was much more, times where it was much less. 800 meters doesn't require huge volumes. I think I peaked out at about 110, 120K a week, which is about 75 miles a week. But I wasn't doing that, very frequently. So that's sort of 10 years of about 70 to 80K a week, about 50 miles a week. And then between 2014 and 17, I didn't really run. I moved to Singapore. I got a full-time job at a flight center company. I managed flight center active travel in Southeast Asia for a little while. I was recruited over there, of which I really didn't like at all. I had a manager that was just an absolute lunatic, and I found the heat in Singapore very difficult. Although I do love Singapore in general, I actually quite like visiting it. But I didn't really like living there. I found the heat very hard, at least to keep running. And then I started Sweat Elite. Just after that, I saved up. I had a very good salary in that job in Singapore, and I'm not a very big spender at all. I'm pretty minimalist, so I saved up a whole lot of money and started Sweat Elite off the back of that, and decided to take 6 months off and try and start it. So at the end of 2017, I think it was November, I launched sweatelite.co and took it from there. And oh man, it would take me 3 podcasts to explain the journey from there. But you're specifically asking, Susie, about the running here, not the business. And then I got into the marathons around that time. So I took about 2.5 years where I didn't really run that much between 2014 and 2017. I probably did, I took months on end without really running at all. I put on a whole lot of weight. I'm 69 kilos now. I got up to 83 kilos, which is, what would that be? 180, 190 pounds maybe. That was slowly over the year. I was just working 60 hours a week at a job and eating chicken and rice and gained a bit of weight. I mean, at the time, 69 kilos what I'm at now. I'm very rarely that. I'm normally 74. So I put on about 8 to 10 kilos in that year. And then, the following couple of years, I sort of went back down to 74 kilos. I got really depressed actually at the end of that Singapore stint. I had really bad anxiety. I had really bad depression. Probably no one really knew that, but I was just really struggling with the demands of the job. I was sleeping very poorly. I had a little bit of insomnia for a while there. I don't know if it was actually insomnia, but I was sleeping very poorly. It was just out of stress of just having so much expectation of the role. Anyway, I'm getting way away from the point. Sorry, Susie, but that's my lifetime mileage. And between 2017 and today, I've probably done an average of maybe the same, actually, 80 to 90 kilometers a week on average, because there's been times where I've taken rest periods and times where I've done 180k a week, but that's not very frequent at all. So yeah, lots of lifetime mileage there, and that's how I got into running. It was basically originally off the back of a football injury, where I was just trying to qualify or at least I was trying to make the Australian Football League, but it just led to running well at 800, and then basically took it from there. Okay, this is actually also a linked question because it's from Xavier on Instagram. He sent to the Sweat Elite Instagram. Hey Matt, really interested in your marathon journey of late, and specifically interested in your heart rates, your HR speed adaptations before you started to consistently hit under 220 lately. Interested in your HR speed adaptations. Is that heart rate? Not sure. Basically, I'm assuming so, but speed adaptations. Basically, I'm messaging on the basis that I am new to running last 2 years from an AFL background and have been able to get to 2:31 in the marathon with intentions of going much faster. I like it. I'm 21 and was interested in your perspective of burning my candles too early with the marathon and whether I should go to racing shorter track for a period of time now. I have raced a few track races, but really never truly experienced it. Do you think I should continue with periodized marathons or just completely stay away for some time? Good question, Xavier. I think that given that you're new to running, you have an AFL background, the answer to this question will be different for most, depending on age, depending on lifetime mileage, depending on all these things. But I personally think my gut feel says for you, I would do marathon block, speed block, marathon block, speed block. So 10 weeks of marathon block race, rest, maybe 2 to 4 weeks, and then do 10 to 14 weeks of 5K, 10K training, do some racing, just so that you don't stay too far away from that speed. In the 5K, 10K training block, I will be doing hill sprints and strides to make sure that your top end speed is still there. And then I would repeat this cycle. If people have been hammering 5K, 10K training for 5, 6, 7 years already, and they feel like they've probably gotten to a point where they can't move the needle much more, my answer would be different. It would be probably marathon block, marathon block, marathon block with maybe just some sprints involved. But for you, that's never really done 5K, 10K training or VO2 max work or really high end sort of zone 4, low zone 5 stuff, I would be doing that and constantly changing the stimulus. So going, VO2 max focus, threshold focus for a block, marathon block, and so on and so forth. That's what I would be doing. I just have a feeling, just based on what you've said here, having already run 2:31, you've come from an AFL background, so I know you've got some basic running in, as in just like aerobic running. I mean, if you've got AFL background, you've basically got a lot of fartlek background, because Australian football is just sprint, rest, jog, sprint, rest, jog constantly. Australians know what I mean. So Xavier, I hope that answers the question, but if you just stuck at marathon training and did marathon cycle, rest, marathon cycle, rest, marathon cycle, rest, you'd probably also improve quite a lot. But I think that if you keep changing the stimulus and you go back to the speed, marathon, rest, speed, marathon, I have a feeling that you're going to probably respond better that way. Blake, via email. Hello, Matt. Lengthy email incoming. Long-time listener and viewer, first-time writer. Well done on your string of sub-220s. I've been following for years and your recent success is well-deserved. Thank you, Blake. I too ran CIM last weekend, 5-minute PB for a time of 3 hours and 28 seconds. So close. And thought I would share a couple of thoughts after consuming your post-race content. 1, the hills. So this is a good question because it also serves for content around people that are interested in running CIM. Nothing more needs to be said. My questions are, do you think the cumulative pounding of the quads from the net loss negates the cardiovascular benefit one receives from running downhill? Yes, is my short answer to that. That's exactly right. Or is this just the natural course of marathon running? This is my first marathon in 2.5 years and first one in almost 4 years without blowing up in the last 5 10K. How would you rank CIM, Indy, and Chicago courses if you could only choose one to go all in for? So Luke actually asked me this on the podcast 2 days ago, on the Training Talk podcast. Go and check that out for a full answer. I really break it down, but I think Chicago is probably the fastest course. It's just dead flat. The only trouble with Chicago is it's often pretty warm. And that's a big bummer for the marathon. The reason why CIM is pretty good and so is Indy is because they're usually quite cold and usually have pretty good weather, which if the course is slightly slower, but the weather is almost certainly going to be way better, you're almost certainly going to run faster at the one that's cooler with a slower course, because I think heat, at least for most people, certainly not the lady that broke the world record in Chicago, she's not bothered by the heat. For most people, heat will cripple them in the last 25% of the race. So I think Chicago is the fastest for sure. Even though that wasn't my PB, I think if it was much colder, I said this on the other podcast, I think that I would have had the potential to run a bit quicker than I did. 2, the weather. Temperature was perfect. But what about the air quality? I've attached a picture from race morning. It was like this the entire few days leading up to the race. I'm from the East Coast and currently live in the Pacific Northwest and was a little caught off guard by the air quality. Could be a good question when you get to see the pulmonologist, as this could have attributed more to your asthma rather than the pollen. I think you are correct. I had no idea about the air quality in California. People have told me this. Very well could be the case. I haven't got into a pulmonologist yet. I'm hoping to in February, but that's probably true. Other thoughts. Congrats on launching Globe Runners Eat, Run, Travel. As an American, I'm really interested in the international locations. It will be great to still see Kenya on the books. Plenty of international locations coming. I think probably Boulder will be next at the very end of March or early April. So I'm plugging Globe Runners now, our new company that does running trips. Check out thegloberunners.com. These are actually questions, by the way. I'm just inserting my own promotions within. Sorry, Blake. But yes, international locations are coming. I'm waiting on the green card, obviously. I don't want to make any for sure international locations until the green card is for sure, because American immigration is a little bit unpredictable sometimes. I don't know if they're going to come back to me and say, hey, we need all these new documents. It's going to take you another 6 to 12 months. And if that's the case, I don't want to have a training camp in Portugal in April and not be able to get there. So they are coming, and Kenya will almost certainly be back on the schedule. The only reason why Kenya is a struggle for me is my asthma gets out of control in Kenya because of the dusty roads. I have had to go to Eldoret Hospital almost every single time I've been there to get on the ventilator, to get in the nebulizer, sorry. It's so bad. The IMO episodes are gold. Love the rants and really appreciate your thoughts on all things running related. You're welcome. the rants. Sometimes I think I'm just whinging and complaining and having goes at people. But I do say, if I rant about anyone and you listen and you're offended by it, you are welcome to come on the podcast and debate what I say. Everyone that I speak about on this podcast that doesn't like what I say, email me, matt@sweatelite.co. I would love to have a conversation about it. Third point, racing every month. Kudos to you for pushing traditional racing and training methods. Thank you. Once again, congratulations on a strong 2024. Looking forward to following you, Reem, and Luke in 2025, and good luck in Houston. Happy holidays and boom shakalaka laka laka. Cheers, Blake. This jokes is. I wonder if Mr. Works Athletics knows that there's these boom shakalakas coming to my inbox every day. Thank you, Blake. Daniel, Instagram. Hi, Matt. Love the podcast and have watched every single YouTube video you've put out since 2021, I think. Perhaps a slightly sensitive topic, but thought I'd ask. Feel free to ignore this, though. You used to massively promote Precision Fuel and Hydration when they were sponsoring and paying to sponsor your content. But then as soon as they dropped you, it seems like you didn't like the product anymore. Did you genuinely enjoy the product, or were you exaggerating this a little bit because of the sponsorship? Nice. So, you say here that I don't like the product anymore. I do like the product. Precision Fuel and Hydration is a fantastic product. There's no questions about that. Just because there's any sort of personal issue, I even said last week that I have a massive personal issue with Angus at Stride, who was insanely rude to me, but I still think Stride is a good product. I'm going to separate the two. But in this case, I still have Precision Fuel and Hydration gels in training and in racing. I think I even put in one of my last videos in CIM that I used their electrolyte tablet in my drinks. I showed it to the camera. I don't know if I said the brand name, but I clearly showed it. And I've still got a whole lot of product of theirs. Not a lot left, and I think that's a great product. I didn't really have any major issue with them. They just really were bothered by the Let's Run thread in January about the IDF guy, which is really strange because it had absolutely nothing to do with them. And they just decided that, I think the email that they sent me was that their values were different to mine. And I just thought, man, how do you not realize Let's Run and these things are fake? It's just such a shame. I will say though that one kind of weird thing about that email was we joined them in a trip in Western States, which they paid for. They paid for the accommodation and flights, and I don't think they just paid for the accommodation and flights, and I agreed to do a video for them if they pay for that. And Reem and I don't drink alcohol. Reem's a Muslim, she doesn't drink alcohol, and they were massively peer pressuring us, at least not all of them, but some of their staff were really peer pressuring us to drink alcohol. And I was pretty firm saying no, and they just kept going. I'm not sure if that's in their values, but that to me is pretty bad. And I've been with them in some parties, and the whole values thing on the email to me was, that alcohol pushing on us was, and that's pretty unhealthy. To me, that was a bit weird to say that the values are different, especially when you're referring to a Let's Run thread. And I think what's the biggest shame about that though is that I've hung out with those guys and been talking to them for hours before. The thing I don't understand about, and Floberg, same thing, and of which we're cool now, they text me every now and then, if you know someone and you've gotten to know them reasonably well and you read something about them online, especially on a public area where anonymous people can write. Sorry, I know I go on about Let's Run most podcasts, but it just seems to come up in the questions. Why are you believing a thread over what you've actually, like, when you've met someone? That I don't understand at all. If I know someone pretty well and I read something about them, the worst thing I would do, or the least thing I would do, is I would ask them about it. Maybe even check in to see if they're all good and ask them if they're okay. If this is true, it's been bent. I really learned who my friends were around that time, and most of my good friends were really supportive. So anyway, hope I'm answering your question. But speaking specifically to this, I think Precision Fuel and Hydration is one of the best companies in the space for products, for service. The whole thing that they said around their values are different to mine based on a Let's Run thread, and especially what Reem and I had to, I wouldn't say had to deal with, that seems like we're the victims, but we were just pretty unimpressed by that. We just thought that was pretty unprofessional. So anyway. All right, another tricky question coming up here, which is interesting. James, Instagram. Hey Matt, were you the one that told Freddy Ovett to do back-to-back marathons this December? And what did you think about his achievements this year in the marathon, running 2:34 at Malaga Marathon 2 weeks after running the Valencia Marathon in 3:16? Okay, so some of you listening probably won't know who that is. So Freddy Ovett is a cyclist. He is the son of Steve Ovett. Steve Ovett is the Olympic champion in the 800 meters from 1980. I actually was coached by Steve for a brief period of time in my early 20s. I don't really know if I would even use the word coached. He kind of advised me. He was living on the Gold Coast, the same place as I was at the time, and I was running a little bit with Freddy back then. And I noticed that, when I was doing a bit of running with Freddy, I wouldn't say I've ever known him super well, but I have had brief periods of time where I've been in contact with him. I couldn't help but notice that it would be very difficult to be in his position, having to live up to his dad's name, who's the Olympic champion. And, Freddy didn't quite have the same running talent as his dad through high school, and I'm not saying that as a jab, that's just what the results say. And I noticed even back then that there was a lot of, it would have been difficult for him. There was a lot of, almost every race had a bizarre excuse. Even some of them were like the timing faltered, which is just a really odd excuse. And we were a little bit in touch back then, but I sort of was always a bit like, just be a little bit careful about some of the things this guy's saying. And then sort of he reconnected with me in 2022 once he noticed the channel, and he was in Boulder at the time, and we did a little bit of running. And then actually reached out to me and noticed that I was running with him and asked if we would do a couple of videos with him. And I asked Freddy, and I actually offered Freddy, I don't really know why I did this, but I just did. I offered to pay him 100% of what Saw was going to give me for the videos. And I think it was because I noticed that he was certainly not... I noticed that he was coming to the end of his career in cycling, and he didn't have sort of a fixed path moving forward. And so I thought, it's fine, I'll offer you the full amount. And I did. I gave him the full amount. We made 2 videos. They're still on the YouTube channel. And then he told me about a month later that he signed a deal with Saw for a annual contract. And that took me by surprise, because I thought, you're not running, you're a cyclist. And I said something that and these are the sorts of comments that get me blocked and people disconnect from me from, which I think are crazy, but turns out this is just a thing. I said to him, do you think it's a good idea taking sponsorship money from other runners? Because I knew that Saw wasn't huge, and that's not my business. I shouldn't have said that. No questions. That was out of line. But I genuinely thought, okay, now you're sort of just taking advantage of, the things I'm setting up for you. And Freddie blocked me immediately after that question. I think he originally sent me a long voice note and then deleted it and then blocked me. And I thought, wow, I thought we were mates. I just asked you a question. I just thought you were focusing on cycling. I didn't realize you would need any sort of running sponsorship. And around the same time, I noticed there was a couple of things, he posted a 10K race on Strava where he claimed to run, I think it was 32:10, and then I looked up the event website and it was 33:08. And there was a couple of more things like that I was just like, oh, he's still doing this thing. And he's sort of portraying at the moment as being a pro cyclist and doing running on the side as an off-season, off-the-cuff thing. And I think the image he's going for is, and once again, Freddie, welcome to join the podcast and correct me here if any of this is wrong. I'm happy, obviously, if there's proof of anything that I've said that's wrong. And I noticed that he really wants to sort of be viewed as this pro cyclist that's doing running on the side as a bit of a laugh. But I don't know if he's still a pro cyclist. I can't find anything online about it anymore. And yeah, a few people have sort of messaged about asking if he's sort of disrespecting marathon distance, of pretending that it's not a, it's something that you can just cruise and jog based on talent. But 2:34 is a good time for someone that's not taking running seriously. But I guess what I want to know is why he just doesn't take it seriously. Why doesn't he just train full time for the marathon, see if he can get down to a really good time? Because, there's loads of cyclists and Ironman triathletes that have run faster than that, especially Ironman triathletes, and they're focusing on Ironman. Yes, they're running and training for sure, but most of the top Ironman triathletes would run under 2:30 for a marathon if they did one. And I wouldn't be surprised if most cyclists that do a little bit of running would be able to run under 2:30. So it's a good result for sure. I know his Valencia marathon 2 weeks before that, he had a whole lot of cramps. A few people were forwarding his results. But yeah, that's just sort of my answer to that question. I thought it was a big shame when Freddy did disconnect based on just that one question, and I thought it was a pretty valid question. I just didn't realize that he needed sponsorship money from a running company, and it's absolutely none of my business to ask that question, because Soar were interested in sponsoring him. They still do support him. I'm not super sure why, only just because he's not really taking running very seriously, and I don't believe he's a pro cyclist, but I would love to be corrected as being wrong there. But I think the thing that's sort of triggering some people is the fact that he sort of, and that's the people that are messaging me, which is quite a few, that he sort of seems to be like, oh, like I'm just running this marathon and for fun. And people are like, why don't you just train properly and run a marathon and see how fast you can run? Like, if you want to claim that you're super talented, why don't you try and run 2:10, 2:12? And because he could do that, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I doubt it. But the image that he gives sort of says that if he did train hard for a year or two, he would run something crazy. Because 3:34 for a cyclist that's running, however many miles a week, to me is not anything outrageously impressive. But 2:34 in itself is a good time. But that's all I've got to say about that. Okay, workouts of the week. We have a 5K, 10K one, a half marathon, and a marathon as usual. Please do tag me on Strava if you are using these workouts. I love to see them. And yeah, I think last week I had probably close to 30 people tag me. So I love to see it, and hope that you're enjoying these ones. Sponsored by the Sweat Elite Coaching Academy, because doing individual workouts here and there, they need to be put in the right place. They need to have the right recovery before and after. But this is just simple ideas, kind of like a cooking show, throwing out a random recipe that you might like. Actually, that's a terrible analogy. Let me just get on with it. All right, 5K, 10K. This is a 34-minute fartlek workout. I am going to share this because I've been prescribing this to athletes that I coach at the Sweat Elite Coaching Academy, and they seem to really like this one. So it's 34 minutes in total. It's a sort of fartlek threshold interval combination of all things. It's just great for improving mostly threshold, bit of VO2 max. Yeah. So it goes 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute of effort. And those efforts should be around threshold, at least to begin with. So the 7, 6, 5, 4, right around half marathon effort, threshold, right around that pace you could hold for an hour. And then the 3, 2, 1 could be a little bit quicker, maybe down to 10K effort, 5K effort in the 1 minute. And in between each one, we're going to have 1 minute float recovery. Float recovery means not fast, not slow. It's basically the fastest you can run while you feel like you are recovering. So 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, of which the 7, 6, 5, 4 would be at threshold. The 3, 2, 1 would be a little bit faster than threshold, and 1 minute float recovery in between each one. Sort of like a wind-up workout, getting a little bit faster throughout. Once again, 15-minute warm-up, 15-minute cool-down. And if you're running right now, which I know at least, 30% of you are, maybe more, these are all written in the description of the podcast or the YouTube channel for you to screenshot and use yourself if you can't remember these. That's the 5K, 10K one. The half marathon one, 15-minute warm-up, 15-minute cool-down, 16K in total, continuous. Basically 10 miles, just shy. 10 miles is 16.09, so this is 16K. It's 1K at half marathon goal pace, 600 float, times 10. So it's basically 10 by a mile continuously, where you're doing 0.62 of the mile, which is 1K, at half marathon goal pace. That's assuming weather is good. If it's not, adjust it a little bit. And then 600 meters float in between each one, which is the same thing. You're basically recovering as fast as you can. So just have that in your mind. It doesn't really matter what the pace is. You have to be feeling like you're recovering, but still running a brisk pace. I love this workout. It's basically 10 by a K with 600 recovery, and it's very effective and it flies by. So I would highly recommend doing that about 2 weeks out till maybe 8 weeks out from a half marathon race, and great indicator to see where you're at. Okay, the marathon workout is a 30K workout. It's actually a 20K session, and you can add 5K warm up and 5K cool down to make 30K, but if you want to make it a longer run, you can add 6K warm up, 6K cool down to make 32K, or even 8K to make 36K. But the workout itself is 20K. And it goes 3K at just slower than goal marathon pace. So maybe 10 seconds a K slower. Sorry for people in miles, this is another kilometers workout, but you can easily adjust your watch to do this. 3K at just slower than goal marathon pace. 2K at goal marathon pace. 1K a little bit quicker than goal marathon pace. 1K jog, 3 times through. Very simple. And that equals, I was about to repeat myself and then I realized you can easily just rewind and go backwards or look at the comments. That is exactly 20K if you do that 3 times through, because the block is 6K, there's 3 blocks of 6K, 1K in between each one, you'll finish on the 1K hard, and that will make a 20K workout. So it's basically a 20K fartlek workout where you're doing, 3, 2, 1, 1. All the way to 20K. So I'd do 5K warm up, 5K cool down to make 30K, but if you want to make it a little bit longer, like I said, just add more to the warm up and the cool down. Cool, they're the workouts of the week. They are sponsored by the Sweat Elite Coaching Academy. You can learn more about that in the description of this podcast. We do have open spots available. My colleague Clara Evans, 225 marathoner, is taking on more clients right now. Casper Peterson over at the triathlon department is taking on more clients. I sometimes take on new clients to inquire if you're interested. Some people sometimes take breaks, or they spend a little bit of time either going back to work or having a break from marathons or whatever they're training for. So reach out. There's possibility I'll have availability too, but you can find out more in the description of this podcast or YouTube channel. Okay, wow, another difficult question here. Michael from Instagram. Hey Matt, you were training with Second City Track Club back in the summer. I saw a post on Instagram about this. Do you still train with that squad at all? Because you mentioned in another podcast that you coach yourself, but I know that group has a coach. Yes. So I explained this a little bit in a previous podcast. I did join them for a little bit there. I didn't see eye to eye with the coach. In my opinion, he has a lot of education to skill up on at the moment, specifically around super shoes, fueling, and just enjoying workouts, because they do the same workouts almost every week. It's usually just a 60-minute tempo, which is fine, but I think if you want to enjoy running, you need to do stuff that's not so monotonous. And there was very little emphasis at all on sprints and speed, which I know for sure is really critical, at least for me. That was on the coaching side. I also noticed little things like people were paying, different prices for things, and I noticed that I was paying much more than others, and then other people were paying even more than me, and I just didn't really agree with all that. And there was just a few comments that I heard about people should be paying more because they earn more money, and these things just I don't like at all. So I left. And then when the whole IDF thing went down, there's a lot of people in the group that are what appears to be somewhat supportive of that. I don't know, but that was just all enough for me to distance myself. And but otherwise, there's some people in that group. Colin used to train with that group. He doesn't anymore, I think for maybe similar reasons about the first few things I said. But I do not train with them anymore. I coach myself. All right, James on Strava says, how much of your recent improvement would you put down to speed training in the first half of the year? Great question. I did 7 months of speed training, basically mile 3K training, and then started the marathon specific block 10 weeks before Chicago, where then I ran 2:19. And I believe I was in shape to be, if the weather was better, maybe you could have run a bit quicker. Better for me personally, because it was a bit warm. I think someone's asked me this, and this is my opinion, and skip forward 2 minutes if you have any mental health challenges around diet and eating disorders. So please do skip ahead 2 minutes if you can. That would be a very sensible thing to do. I think 50% at least of my improvement this year has come from dropping weight, to be honest. And why I say that is because I've explained this before, but I'll try to be more clear. I really started to notice this, of which I sort of forgot about for a little while. In 2021, in 2020, I ran 224 at the Lake Buell Marathon in March. That set off my Achilles pain for the next 15 months. I was hindered severely by Achilles tendinopathy. And somewhat fortunately for me, it was during COVID, so there wasn't many races, but it was agony. It got to the point where after 14 and a half months of running in pain every day, I quit running for 6 weeks. I just thought, just leave it for a while. I haven't run pain-free since March 2020. It was May 2021 at the time. I took 6 weeks entirely off living in Boulder. That's when I launched the YouTube channel. So obviously there was at least some good things going on in my life because the YouTube channel took off very quickly. And I took 6 weeks off, and then I trained for 14 weeks and ran 220. And that is interesting in itself because people often think you need to have big base, and I would have assumed after 14 months of very low volume and lots of little weeks off here and there, and then 6 weeks totally off, I'm starting from quote unquote zero. But 14 weeks later, I ran 220. But the reason why I share that story in this context is because I was 70 kilos when I ran 220. And I've shared this before. I don't really know how I got down to that because I usually, if I eat mindlessly and don't care, I sit at about 74, 73 kilos. And when I ran 220 off low volume, about 70 miles a week, it was 68, I think, 110, 105K a week. I ran 220 and I was very light. And I remember thinking to myself, there's only one reason why I think I've ran fast here. It's because I'm so light. And then I know this is stupid to say, but I kind of forgot about it for a while. And I went back to, and I think it was because I didn't do anything to get that light. I just was that light. And I've said this before, to this day, I don't understand how I got that light. I obviously got that light because I was in a calorie deficit a lot of the time, but I didn't try. I was traveling a lot. I was very busy filming. And I guess I just had a lot of days where I just forgot to eat that much, which is kind of weird to say. Because I went from 74 in May, I weighed myself, to 70 in November and ran 220. And it was around then that I thought weight plays a big role for me. And then I was sort of back around 73, 74 kilos for most of the next few years. Did higher volume, didn't do anything too crazy high, around 80, 90 miles a week, 140, 150K, and couldn't break 221. You know, around 222, 223, 224 a lot of times, around 221 once. And so this year I went all in on the marathon. I thought, let's do everything I know to get better, drop the weight, higher mileage, sprints, gym, and then here we are. So 218, hoping to run quite a bit faster next year. And I have a video coming out in the next day or two sharing what that goal is, because next year's goal is lofty for sure, and it will involve going about that lofty goal in a very different way to doing the traditional build-ups. I'm sure some of you have already probably figured out what that will mean. So how much of the recent improvement would I put down to speed training? 50% to the weight, 25% to the speed training, actually probably more like 30 or 35% to the speed training, and probably the rest to gym. And yeah, I think that's probably it. So 25, 35% perhaps. It's really hard to say. But the reason why I put my weight so high up on that spectrum, on that graph of percentage in terms of how much it helped, is because of what I noticed in 2021. And I even really wonder now, I don't have the nerve to try it because I sort of know what works for me now, everything that I did in the last 6 months. I almost want to try at some point approaching a marathon, getting down to a little bit lighter than now, but doing also kind of low volume, because I really wonder if I still am wondering if volume right now for me really matters that much, even though some might point to the fact that, yeah, but you did 110 miles a week for the 6 weeks leading to Chicago, that surely helped. Yep, but maybe that part didn't help that much. If Luke Keogh, my podcast host, is listening, he probably is sitting there going, it definitely helped. He could be right, I don't know. But I think the weight is the biggest thing. So there's the answer. Okay, Brad on Strava. I've been following for a few years now, but I didn't know your first marathon squeaked under 3 hours. That shows that anyone's ceiling is much higher than we expect and is encouraging to me, improving on 256. In the era of super shoes and training ingenuity, double threshold, why haven't we seen multiple long runs in a week, not the same day, or more per month be expected? Great question, Brad. I think it's coming. I actually think that this is coming. I think that especially when people right now are really trying to improve their recovery. So I shared last week that I've noticed a recovery stack that really helps me improve potentially upwards of 50% as fast. I just made that 50% up, but it seems like it's about that. And that is creatine, protein, and ketones very quickly after a workout. People doing this, they might add in more things that help you recover that I don't know about. And then if you're adding in super shoes and you're adding in, anything else that I don't know about, yeah, we very well may see. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind here is Kelvin Kiptum, because I spoke to Kelvin Kiptum a month before Chicago Marathon in person. We met up with him in Kenya at a KFC of all places. It was just a convenient place that was an easy landmark to find. He didn't eat any KFC, but we met there. It was at Rupa Mall. People that have been to Kenya might know where that is. And we asked him all about his training, and he was doing several long runs in a week, not every week. Oftentimes a 30K and a 40K run in the same week. He was doing something like 270, 280K a week, which is like Cam Levin's similar volume. I think he was onto something. His coach did say publicly, which is sort of, been on the rounds of the media, not recently, but around the time that he ran Chicago, that his coach even said that he was worried about how much training he was doing and that he wouldn't be able to keep it up for very long. Reminded me a little bit of Jim Ryan, who many Americans would probably know from back in the 60s, 70s, who just went crazy with training, doing absolutely absurd workouts like 5400s and 68, 69, and these huge amounts of, he ran, was it 351 for the mile? Could be wrong with that, but he ran the world record for the mile. And then he was basically cooked when he was, some of these figures might be slightly inaccurate because I learned this stuff 10 years ago, but he didn't last very long. And I think Kelvin Kiptum might have been going down that same path potentially of just doing crazy things, running insanely fast, and then maybe not having a very long career, which is almost the opposite in a way of Eliud Kipchoge, who's obviously had a very long career, probably trained pretty safely. From what I understand, he doesn't do much more than 130 miles a week or 200K a week really ever. And he also has quite long breaks after marathons. And it doesn't sound like Kelvin was doing that so much. I think he was more on the accelerator, like really, really trying to push the needle constantly. And I think he 21 or 22 when he died, maybe 23. But I do remember his coach saying to us in person, of course, he also mentioned this on interviews after he ran Chicago, that his training was just insane. I do think he was doing multiple long runs a week from memory. I can't remember exactly what he said in that conversation. I wish I'd recorded it, but I didn't. But yeah, I do think you're right. I think that very soon, I think what we got to remember is, and this is not the case for running, it's the case for almost anything. We tend to just look to what's the best people are doing, not always, and we just copy. And it takes someone with, foresight or, education or big balls to try something very different and for it to work, and then for people to go, oh, okay, there is a different way to do it. It may be more risky. It may, it may present more risks. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years, especially when the recovery side of things is clearer, even though I know, already that the key to recovery is predominantly nutrition and sleep. But if you combine everything that you possibly know about recovery, including these Normatec boots, which I've never really used before, but many people claim that they're helpful. If you're listening right now and you know anything that is helpful to your recovery, please comment in the YouTube description or send me a message. But if people fully, wrap all of these things together and they also, utilize super shoes very frequently, I wouldn't be surprised if training methods change to the point where people are doing much more intensity within training, and you're seeing faster results. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But I'm watching from the sidelines to see if anyone's going to do that. I think, like I said before, Kelvin was probably the first one to really test the waters there, and look what happened. Such a shame that he's no longer with us. But yeah, fantastic question, Brad. And I think that it made me wonder, like, should I experiment with doing 2 long runs in a week and sprints and nothing else? I mean, who knows what would happen there? So anyway, some great questions this week, some tricky questions to answer. If I've offended anybody on this podcast, you're welcome to jump on the podcast and talk to me. Don't be upset. Don't go block me, even though most of those people that I just mentioned have already blocked me, just because I've said something that they don't like, which I think is a bit of a shame. But next week, I'm going to, because it's going to be the last podcast of the year, I think. Yeah. I'm going to talk about my favorite super shoes and trainers of the year. I'm not a big shoe guy, but everyone's obsessed with shoes. I see on YouTube now, all of the top running channels are just shoes for the most part, except Total Running Productions. But he doesn't make any original content, even though his content is great. He rips it from everyone else, which is not really original at all, is it? But I will talk about my favorite 5 super shoes of the year and favorite 5 trainers, even though I don't even know if I've used 5 trainers. But I'll speak to that next week after I have a good think about it. And I'm also going to talk a lot about other YouTubers and podcasts. I did a little bit of a piece on this last year on In My Opinion, but there's some great new channels that have come out recently, and I'm going to speak to the ones that I've been paying attention to. I'll throw one name out there right now that I've been really loving, Jake Barraclough, the crazy British runner that's over in the UK right now that's ripping marathons and half marathons and doing 250k a week. His YouTube channel is so funny. He's a absolute gem for the sport, and there's a whole lot more here that I would love to speak to. So next week, I'll be talking all about that. If you have any questions or if you have anything that you'd like to say, please do email me at matt@sweatelite.co, not .com, at .co, and I would be happy to either respond to you directly, and if I do not respond to you directly, you'll probably hear the question answered on the podcast. So that's what I've been doing recently. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I only did one edit today. I actually realized as I was filming this at about the 40-minute mark, I noticed that I didn't hit record on my microphone. So the volume here is coming out of the iPhone, which is not going to be as good. And that's the only reason why there's one edit. I literally looked down at the computer and noticed that the audio recording never started, only the video did. So that's why there's one edit at about 40 minutes. Next week, I'll try and remember to put the audio recording on so the audio quality is a little bit better. This is coming from the iPhone this time. But thank you everyone for tuning in. My friend from Finland from the Athletics Integrity Unit is switching off. I'm switching off. I'll speak to you all next week, and I look forward to doing so.